Okay, hello everybody. Little glitch there as I get used to the YouTube live. Anthony, your chin is cut off. You might want to adjust your camera.
I'm laying low, Katty.
You've got your head in your hands.
Yes, I'm laying
low.
A
bit like
That's
Marco
why,
Rubio did just now, and the ambassador from Ukraine. We have just jumped on to do this chat because of the events in the White House and watching Vladimir Zelensky with Donald Trump and JD Vance and the blow up. I mean, quite extraordinary blow up. I've had my phone going off the hook from members of Congress, senators, ambassadors who are all saying they've never seen anything like this. And most of them saying they're kind of heartbroken by what they see and how extraordinary it was. Jump in, Anthony, what's your initial reaction to what you saw? I know that you were in a meeting, but you've watched the video afterwards.
No, I've watched the whole thing. I watched the tape.
It's excruciating. I find it really hard to watch. It makes me...
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on. So let's just break it down quickly. Was he ambushed or was he not ambushed? I personally feel that he was ambushed.
That Zelensky was ambushed.
Number two, when Trump is saying the setup yesterday, did I say that he was a dictator or not? And we're going to have a really good meeting and everything's going to go well. And then they put him in a crossfire like that where they ambush him. And he was trying to be polite and he was trying to be respectful, but he's also a very articulate person. And you just have to remember something. There are different American perspectives. So just for the Europeans listening, there are Americans, myself included, that believe that we have to defend each other for the cause of freedom. And we do believe that the aggressor was the Russians. And we can debate about whether or not Ukraine, not the Ukraine. I apologize. We could debate whether or not Ukraine should be part of NATO or not. But Ukraine has received security guarantees from the United States and from the West since 1994, signed guarantees. Mm-hmm. And so the notion now that you have the leader of the free world, or he's about to lose the mantle of leadership of the free world soon, the Europeans will have to take that role from the United States because this man is trying to create something very different than Americans and Europe and the free world's used to. But I'll just say this: ambush, totally against the interests of the United States, totally for the interests of the Russian Federation, and not surprising to me because I was like, wow, this seems like it's too good to be true that they're going to cut a deal and they're going to protect the Ukraine sovereignty. And so obviously that didn't happen. Do you think he was ambushed? And you think that was premeditated? I believe it was.
Let me give you a little bit of what I've been hearing since this happened, the kind of TikTok of what people are thinking here in Washington. First of all, a senator who met with Zelensky this morning, and Zelensky had a bipartisan group meeting up on Capitol Hill with a group of senators. Now, there were fewer Republicans at that meeting than there have been in the past, but there were some Republicans. And this senator said that at that meeting, they were hopeful that a deal could be done. So that was just this morning, not many hours ago. And then this senator texted me and said, look, I think what happened is this, what you're suggesting. Zelensky went in there, and if you listen to it, up until the moment where JD Vance intervenes, then actually the meeting is going okay. And he says, the senator told me, look, I think JD Vance hijacked that meeting and deliberately threw Zelensky under the bus, deliberately riled him up. My understanding is that they were pissed off that he turned up not wearing a suit. You can point to the fact that Churchill didn't wear a suit when he turned up to meet FDR because his country was at war. Elon Musk, I have never seen in a suit except for at the inauguration. That's by the by. Maybe that is something Zelensky should have done. And the question then is, if you look at JD Vance's past statements, and I've gone back over them since the meeting, back in 2022, February of 2022, so when JD Vance was running for president, he said in an interview, I've got to be honest, I don't really care what happens to Ukraine. And he also said they have the most corrupt leadership in the world. He said the Ukrainian people are brave, but they have the most corrupt leadership in the world. So I think JD Vance clearly, and you listen to the Munich speech, he's on a mission. He's on a mission to distance himself from this war, America from this war, get America the heck out of Ukraine, no more support. He doesn't like Zelensky. And the other thing that, is pretty clear is that Trump just has this personal animus. Trump is very, as you know, Anthony, he's super personal. There's not a philosophy, really. A lot of what he does is personal. And ever since the first impeachment, when Trump was impeached because of a phone call he had with Zelensky in which he asked for dirt on the Biden family, even though Zelensky has never released the audio of that phone call, Trump has had it in for Zelensky. And very recently, just this week, Trump said, Putin and I went through this together. So for me, this was an ambush, but it's very reflective of a total break now between America and Europe. And everything that Macron did this week and everything that Starmer bent over backwards and gave a masterclass in diplomacy to do this week, I think has been undone in the course of this meeting. My question for you is, why did Zelensky let himself get into that position? I mean, knowing Trump, why did he go there?
Listen, I mean, does he know Trump the way I know Trump? Probably not. Was he signaled from his staff and Trump's staff that it was going to be okay? Probably so. Is he a little bit of a risk taker? Yes, he is. I mean, you have to admire this man. This is a man that was told at the Munich Security Conference in February of 2022, you have sanctuary in the West, in the United States somewhere. You can go into exile, and the Ukraine is going to be taken over. Ukraine is going to be taken over by the Soviet Union or the Russians, I should say. And so he didn't have that happen. He's a hero to his people. He's a warrior, and he's a little bit of a risk taker. So he was willing to do what he thought he needed to do for his country. But listen, anybody that thinks this reflects well on the United States, Mr. Musk is putting out on Twitter a watch this intently, and this sort of browbeating that we gave to Volodymyr Zelensky is a great thing, I guess. I think the Russians, are aghast at this. Honestly, I think the Russians are like, okay, whoa, we want this guy on our side, but is he really this crazy? Because even in Russian Cold War diplomacy with the United States, nobody did this. There's no leaders.
You mean the volatility is freaking people out, even in Russia.
Exactly. There's no public humiliation of leadership at this level. These are supposed to be A players, metaphorically, Olympic political leaders. There's supposed to be some level of decorum. And if you are a Russian personality profiler, a Russian intelligence agent, President Putin himself, you have to be looking at this and say, okay, wow, there's random cards in this deck. First of all, Trump is not playing with a full deck, but whatever is left of his deck, there's random cards that are going to show up while I'm at the card table. And so it's very, very dangerous. And by the way, I am a market person. If you walked out here, we've got billions of dollars under management, and the market's telling you that they don't like this. The market's telling you risk premium is up. Tariffs are going to cause a recession. The market's telling you, okay, wait a minute. We need our political leadership to have some type of predictable decorum. And Donald Trump and now his minion, J.D. Vance, are telling you they don't want that. And by the way, I'm just going to say this, and I don't care at this point. I think Rubio is really...
Did you ever, Anthony? Was there a point at which you did?
I'm trying to. I'm trying to. It's like my wife yells at me, says, don't... Katty's probably smarter than you. Don't overtalk. Okay, I'll try not to. But I'm just saying, I think Rubio's a disaster at this point.
Yeah, looking at Rubio in that meeting.
His body language is terrible, but what the hell is he doing?
Yeah.
You can't stand there. And talk about, if you don't mind, the coordination of tweets that have come from Trump's team with all the same chant, including Rubio.
So look, this is
Marco. What the hell are you doing?
It's super
interesting. Go dunk
your
head in cold water. Go for a cold plunge, brother.
I'm watching I'm going to confess, just as you were talking, not that I was not listening to every single word you said, Anthony, I promise, but I was also pulling up Twitter on another window, because Zelensky, as we are speaking, is tweeting back to every single member and leader in Europe, thanking them for their support. So it's been sort of slightly surreal how this is all. It played out in real time, and we watched. Our phones blew up with what was happening. And then you had to kind of jump onto X, I'm afraid, to watch the kind of fallout of this, because you're right. There's been a lot of coordination. The president of the European Parliament, who you and I met just the other night, has tweeted out her support for Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's the same language that you're hearing from Ursula von der Leyen and from other European leaders as well, EU leaders as well. There's a coordinated campaign on the European side. You've now got Zelensky thanking every single member individually of the Europeans on Twitter. And then you've got this tweet response from the administration as well, including Marco Rubio's tweet thanking President Trump for standing up for America in a way that no other president has ever done, and for being brave and defending American rights. I mean, I'm just looking at the images. Guys, go and have a look. To all of you who are following this, just have a quick look at Marco Rubio. He just looks like he would rather be on the front lines in Ukraine, frankly, than be in that Oval Office. But he is bent over, and he's thanked President Trump for standing up for American values.
The insolent pig finally got a proper slap down from the Oval Office. And real Donald Trump is right. The Kiev regime is gambling with World War III. Who did that come from?
That came from Dmitry Medvedev in Moscow.
Yeah. That's where we are now. So we're in a really weird situation.
So that's also the same as that is one of the reactions I've had from people up on the Hill who are supporters of Ukraine and supporters of Zelensky, and we're hoping that there would be some kind of a deal. And they're pointing me directly, in fact, to that tweet, Anthony, the one that you've just read up, as a way of saying, okay, this may be freaking out the Russians, but the public response from the Russians has been that this is so helpful to them. Okay, I want to give you another tweet, though, that's come out from your old friend, H.R. McMaster. It's impossible to understand why Trump and Vance seem determined to put more pressure on Zelensky while they seem to be coddling Putin. H.R. McMaster, of course, was Trump's chief of staff in the first Trump administration, somebody you know well. And he doesn't often tweet. I think I'm right in saying this, right, Anthony? He doesn't often. He has been quoted in books, of course, recently, saying that he thinks that Trump has fascist tendencies, but he doesn't often put himself out there in public like that. So the reaction as well from people who served with Trump before has been pretty staggering too.
Well, listen, General McMaster knows. He just wrote a recent book about it. John Kelly knows. Jim Mattis knows. Listen, there was a reason why, ladies and gentlemen, 40 of us spoke out against the return of Donald Trump to the presidency. I just left the Bitcoin conference, by the way, and I asked people for a show of hands who voted for Donald Trump, and it was probably 80-20 for Donald Trump because he's supposedly pro-Bitcoin. But remember this about him. You're getting the entire buffet table with Donald Trump. You can't pick off things that you like. You've got to get everything. You've got to get the attack on Prime Minister Trudeau, Governor Trudeau, 51st state. You got to get the attack on Greenland and the Danes. You got to get the attack on the European leadership. You've got to get the Zelensky's a dictator comment. You're not going to get the sleeve of things that you like on their own a la carte. You get everything with Donald Trump. And, it's sad for me to see this because he will hurt the Bitcoin community. He will hurt the business community. He will hurt the international community. And I know this sounds crazy to everybody listening, but the Russians are worried about it. Trust me, the Russians are sitting there saying, okay, there's certain things that we want and there's certain strategies that we want in terms of what we're going to control in terms of our sphere of influence. But this cat is so unpredictable and he may be on our side, he may not be on our side. And Katty, you know this, they have weak cards.
Yeah.
The Russians have a GDP that's lower than Italy now, smaller than the state of Texas. Their army has been decimated. You tell me the number of Russians that have died in this war. Zelensky's held on with the help of the West, and they have a weak hand, and Trump is going to give them the entire card table. But you trust me on this. What happened today has
not
them
normal. No,
they're freaked out by it.
Yeah,
they have to be.
So I had
they wouldn't be normal, or even if they're evil people or malevolent,
right.
They're rational. They can't be up for that.
After it happened, I had a long call with somebody actually I was meant to meet, but I didn't because we're doing this chat. And anyway, the news blew up, who was an ambassador for Japan under Shinzo Abe in the first Trump administration. And he was saying he saw this happen with Donald Trump in meetings with Shinzo Abe and with other world leaders when Trump got angry, and he would blow off the handle like this. But it was never happened in public before. And that's what is, I think, worrying people so much this time around, because they've seen Trump behave like this in private. And as we know, Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan, who ended up getting killed, actually had one of the better relationships with Donald Trump. But even he was subjected to some of this behind closed doors, and they managed to bring the relationship back again. But I think it's the fact that this happened in public that is particularly alarming for people. Okay, we've got some great questions coming up. And thank you, guys, all of you, for joining this. Thank you particularly to our founding members, those of you who are joining us and have joined as founding members recently. We welcome you to our little club. And there is a question here from Mike Dignam, who's just become a founding member. Thanks, Mike, who says, this was definitely a setup. Should the state visit to the UK now be cancelled? I hear Canada isn't happy about the visit either. Well, Canada isn't happy because Keir Starmer wouldn't weigh in his meeting with Donald Trump on whether Canada should become the 51st state. I'm going to relate that to what I heard from the former Japanese ambassador, which was that there was an acceptance that, you have to deal with the cards you have. And so I don't think you are going to see this UK state visit cancelled, because everybody realizes that Donald Trump is the duly elected president of the United States. The American security umbrella for the moment is irreplaceable. I mean, if you are a country like South Korea or Australia or the Philippines or Japan or even Europe, where else, or Canada, where else are you going to look? America's military is just too big. The economy is just too big. And this diplomat was saying to me that even in the kind of medium to long term, it's very hard for America's allies, particularly in the Pacific region, to think where else they could go. And so they all recognize that, America's allies recognize that however irrational he may be, however angry he may get, however unusual, unprecedented a president he is, however much he may bully them in public or in private, they have no choice but to deal with him. And I don't think you will see the state visit being canceled.
Okay. But let me ask you something perhaps somewhat existential, but let me just ask it to you. The founders of the American government, were they not trying to protect the minority, meaning the people that lost the vote? They were trying to protect them, right?
That's the point of democracy, isn't it?
Right, and that's
what you do to protect your minorities, I think, is the definition.
So they tried to do that. Okay, so if you have the strong and you have the weak, does good leadership require you to protect the weak, Katty, or does good leadership require you to roll the weak? Do you roll the weak, or do you protect the weak?
Well, I would say that protecting the weak is probably the definition of good leadership.
Okay, and so now let's role play in Trump world right now, because someone is asking a really good question. Is there anybody in Trump world that's going to walk this thing down? And so let's role play. They're in the Oval Office. They're in the cabinet room. They're in somewhere in the White House. E-Bike Newbie is asking this, and they're saying to each other, wow, this was great. And Elon Musk is texting, tweeting context, and look at us, how strong we are. This cat doesn't have the cars that we have, and we rolled him, and we're showing people how great America is. But it's the exact opposite. You see, it's the exact opposite. What you're doing is you're sending a signal that you're weak and you're insecure. And what you're doing is you're sending a signal that your hyper-masculine bravado is actually a sign of insecurity and weakness. Benevolency
But
would be...
that is certainly not how this is going to be seen in Trump world.
No, not at all.
I mean, look at I bet at your Bitcoin conference, those 80% who raised their hand and said they voted for Donald Trump, I imagine they're happy with this, right?
I think market participants are concerned, as I pointed out. Market participants are saying to themselves, whoa, this is sort of bad because this creates lots of unpredictability, and we don't like unpredictability in the markets. But what I'm trying to get at is there is no one in Trump world that's turning to Donald Trump right at this moment and saying, hey, this is totally against everything that we stand for. This is totally against everything you're trying to build with people like Keir Starmer, Prime Minister Starmer, or President Macron. Can you take a step back? We need to get to a security agreement with Ukraine, and we need to get to a security agreement that protects the sovereignty of Ukraine, even though they're weaker than us, and even though their hand is worse than ours. And that to me is a very, very big problem now for the United States, because it will create, Katty, unnatural alliances. You know, the Canadians are already talking to the Chinese about selling their energy.
Yeah.
You know, they put 78% of their aluminum into our country for our car manufacturing. You want to have a trade war in North America with Canada. You want to shut down Zelensky and force the people that live close to Ukraine to step up and protect Zelensky, and you want to leave yourself out of that equation. Imagine a scenario, Katty, where the Europeans get together. It looks like they're speaking off the same sheet music. They get together, they protect Zelensky, they repel the Russians, and we're out of it. And imagine the waning influence of the United States in a situation like that.
We're going to wrap this up soon. And obviously we have our regular podcast that came out
this
morning.
Is cheaper than therapy for me. Okay, you're cheaper than my therapist. Are we really wrapping it up this soon? I mean,
no. And I think judging by the number of people that have joined us,
probably
I think
like $600
it's like a collective global therapy session going on right
now.
Know.
I mean, should I have to call my shrink after this, Katty?
I just got a text from somebody who was a senior official in all through the first Trump administration, who did text me saying that this was extraordinarily painful to watch. And JD is playing to his online chorus. The consensus seems to be that a lot of this was driven by JD Vance, but I don't think we should underestimate the degree to which Trump is in on this too. I mean, in the end, it's Trump's presidency. And if Trump had wanted to, find a way to make a deal. Now, maybe Donald Trump, and this gets to a question that has just come in on the chat about how viable was an economic, this is from Sino7, what is your view of the viability of an economic deal via minerals? Could it be as a backdoor to station US troops, and should Zelensky have bit the bullet? It was very clear to me, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, gave a masterclass in diplomacy and how to deal with Donald Trump. I texted you about this, Anthony, while I was watching it. He hit all the right notes. It was super impressive. I mean, he talked about winning. He talked about being number one. He talked about golf. He talked about not wanting to reward the aggressors and pointed not to Russia, but to Iran, for example. I mean, and then, of course, he invited him to and fell over himself to say how extraordinary it was to get a second straight visit. So I don't know if Zelensky should have done that in order to get this minerals deal, but there's been a lot of chat in Washington in the last couple of days about how the Obama administration was actually offered a mineral deal with the Ukrainians, something quite similar to what had been being discussed at the moment. And the Obama team had looked at the logistics of this and found actually it was not clear how many minerals there were, and whether it was possible to get these minerals out, and the kind of economic viability of trying to extract these minerals was probably not worth it. So now, did Trump actually realize, or has the chatter in Washington about that kind of exposed this deal that Trump was going to present as a win as not really being much of a win. I mean, a bit like you said on the podcast this week about being the kind of emperor has no clothes. Was it a sort of paper tiger win? And so did Trump just decide, actually, you know what? I don't even think there is an economic win to be had. And he was happy to let JD go with it. JD's instincts, which was, I don't know. And because Trump doesn't have much love for Zelensky anyway, that was the way he went. Maybe there just wasn't a deal to be done.
This is just, to me, that was a total setup, because if there was a deal to be done and Trump thought that that was a deal that could be done that would make him look good, he would have done the deal. He thinks this makes him look good to the new world order that he wants to create. He wants spheres of influence. He wants to control North America and perhaps the Western Hemisphere. And he wants other autocratic-like leaders to know that they're okay in their playgrounds. And the real question, I know we have to wrap, but the real question before we do wrap is, what do you do if you're Zelensky? What do you do?
Yeah, we better wrap, because otherwise your therapist is going to be calling me saying,
yeah,
hold on a second, you're taking my business away. This is a very
I'm not to be paranoid, but there are rumors that you perhaps have already called my therapist, Katty, and you told my therapist to not overspeak in these podcasts. I think maybe perhaps you've done that already.
Okay, look, if Ukraine and Europe were able to hold on for long enough, do you think the midterms could turn the position around? No, because in the end, this is going to be the president's decision, and the president controls the Republican Party in the Senate. And it's unlikely that they'll get the Senate back again. And it's going to be, I don't see that they would be able to mount any kind of deal. And plus that's 2 years away. One other thing I think we should point people to, a little bit of news that went under the radar, and I wanted to get your reaction to, because I do think it's kind of indicative of the bigger sort of jaw-dropping thing that's happened over the last week or two, which has been the realignment of America's relationship with Russia under this administration, which is that last week, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, ordered US Cyber Command to stop all planning against Russia. Now, if you think of what Russia has done in terms of its meddling in America, its capacity in America, I mean, the fact that Twitter this afternoon is full of Russian bots celebrating this. I just thought that was a very interesting piece of evidence, if you like, of how the Trump administration is degrading its defensive and offensive capacities against Russia at the moment. And I look at what happened this afternoon in the Oval Office, and it feels like it's part of the same story to me.
Yeah, I think it's well said. I think it's a good insight. Okay, I know we have to wrap, but I will just say that the Democrats have to figure out a way to bring into their tent the H.R. McMasters, the Chris Christies, the Nikki Haley's. Yeah. I know you may not like them ideologically, but if you can expand the tent, you can take on this ultra nationalism. You can take on this nastiness that's coming from Donald Trump and his group, and you can break it. And remember, other situations where there was tenuous situations in a country, tough people that stood up against nonsense were long time rewarded by history. And so sometimes you got to hold your nose. You may not like Chris Christie. I like him. I was one of his donors. You may have to hold your nose and go to him and others, and let's create a big, big pro-democracy, pro-America, pro-Friends of America and Friends of Democracy coalition here in America. That's how I would like to end this.
Okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this very impromptu live on Russia, Ukraine, and the extraordinary scenes that we saw in the Oval Office today. Having covered American politics now for 20 years, I have never seen anything like that. And I think there'll be a lot more to talk about as this plays out and we get more reaction from world leaders and from Americans. And maybe, Anthony, you're right. Maybe there will be voices in America who also stand up and say that this was, something that was not beneficial to the United States, because in the end, something will hit America and America will need its allies. And at the moment, it is shedding allies. And that probably is a vulnerable position for the country to be in. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.